Hello, and welcome to another video with videos to fall asleep to. In this video, we will cover the history of aviation. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. On any given day, at any given second, there are roughly 1 million human beings suspended in the sky. They are sitting in pressurized aluminum tubes, hurtling through the stratosphere at 600 miles an hour, in an environment where the temperature is 60 degrees below zero, and the air is too thin to breathe. They are watching movies. They are drinking lukewarm coffee from plastic cups. They are complaining about the legroom. We have taken the greatest, most impossible dream in the history of our species, and we have made it completely, utterly boring. But to understand the history of aviation is to peel back that boredom. It is to remember that for 99.9% of human existence, we were bound to the dirt. We looked at the birds with a mixture of envy and religious awe. We told stories of Icarus flying too close to the sun. We built kites. We drew sketches. But we could not fly. This is the story of how we finally broke the surly bonds of Earth. It is a story of obsession, of blinding courage, of world wars, and of a relentless, unnatural need to go faster, higher, and further. Act 1. The bicycle mechanics. For centuries, men tried to fly by strapping wings to their arms and jumping off towers. They mostly ended up breaking their legs or their necks. By the 1800s, we had figured out the hot air balloon. We could float, but floating is not flying. Floating is being at the mercy of the wind. True flight requires 3 things: lift, thrust, and crucially, control. At the turn of the 20th century, the race to build the first heavier-than-air flying machine was dominated by wealthy aristocrats, famous scientists, and government-funded institutions. They built massive, overpowered contraptions that inevitably crashed into rivers or fields. They failed because they approached flying like driving a carriage. They wanted a stable platform. But 2 brothers from Dayton, Ohio, realized the fundamental truth of the sky. Orville and Wilbur Wright were not scientists. They were bicycle mechanics. And because they built bicycles, they understood that a machine doesn't need to be inherently stable. A bicycle falls over if you let it go. It only stays upright when a human is constantly, dynamically balancing it. The Wright brothers realized an airplane had to be the same. They didn't just build a wing, they built a wind tunnel in their shop to test hundreds of wing shapes. They didn't just build an engine, they had their mechanic, Charlie Taylor, build a lightweight aluminum block engine from scratch. And most importantly, they invented wing warping, a system of pulleys and cables that twisted the wings, allowing the pilot to bank and roll. On December 17, 1903, on the freezing, wind-swept dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Orville Wright lay on his stomach on the lower wing of the flyer. The engines sputtered to life. The flight lasted just 12 seconds. It covered 120 feet. It was shorter than the wingspan of a modern Boeing 747. But when Orville skidded into the sand, the world was permanently, irrevocably changed. We had steered. We had flown. Act 2. The Canvas Knights and the Great War. For the first decade, airplanes were frail, dangerous toys. They were made of spruce wood, unbleached muslin cloth, and piano wire. If you flew into a strong gust of wind, the plane might simply disintegrate around you. But then came 1914. And the greatest accelerator of technology in human history: war. When World War I broke out, airplanes were initially just used for reconnaissance. Pilots from opposing sides would fly past each other, wave, and perhaps take a photograph. But soon, the waving stopped. They started carrying bricks to throw at each other's propellers. Then, they brought pistols. Then, a Dutch engineer named Anthony Fokker figured out how to synchronize a machine gun with the propeller blades, allowing a pilot to fire straight through the spinning wooden arc without shooting it off. The airplane became a weapon. The sky over the trenches of Europe became a new kind of gladiator arena. The dogfight. Young men, barely in their 20s, flew machines covered in highly flammable fabric. They had no parachutes. The generals thought parachutes would encourage them to abandon their expensive planes too quickly. If your engine caught fire, you either burned to death or you jumped. From this horror emerged the first aviation celebrities, the aces. Men like the French pilot René Fonck, or the German aristocrat Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. They were viewed as knights of the sky, engaging in noble, one-on-one combat far above the mud and the mustard gas of the trenches. It was a romantic, terrifying lie. The life expectancy of a new pilot on the Western Front was roughly 3 weeks. But by 1918, the airplane had evolved from a fragile kite into a terrifying, lethal machine capable of speeds exceeding 130 miles an hour. Act 3. The Barnstormers and the Ocean. When the war ended, there were thousands of surplus planes and thousands of adrenaline-addicted young men who knew how to fly them. This was the Golden Age, the era of the Barnstormers. Pilots bought cheap Curtiss Jenny biplanes, flew across rural America, and landed in farmers' fields. For $5, they would take you up. They performed loops, walked on the wings, and crashed with alarming frequency. They kept the romance of aviation alive in the public imagination. But the true prize was not a loop-the-loop over a cornfield. The true prize was the ocean. The Atlantic Ocean was a terrifying gray void. To cross it by ship took over a week. To cross it by air seemed like a suicide mission. Many tried. Many vanished into the freezing water without a trace. Until 1927. Enter a 25-year-old airmail pilot named Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh was a fanatic for efficiency. To cross the Atlantic, he helped design a monoplane called the Spirit of St. Louis. It was essentially a flying gas tank. To save weight, he carried no radio, no parachute, and no gas gauge. He didn't even have a front window. The main fuel tank sat directly in front of him. To see forward, he had to use a small periscope. On May 20th, he took off from a muddy runway in New York. For 33.5 hours, he flew alone. He fought ice on his wings. He fought terrifying storms. But mostly, he fought sleep. He hallucinated ghosts in the cockpit. He held his eyelids open with his fingers. When he finally saw the coast of Ireland and eventually the lights of Paris, he had achieved the impossible. A mob of 150,000 people rushed his plane when he landed. Lindbergh had shrunk the globe. The oceans were no longer a barrier. They were a commute. A few years later, Amelia Earhart would prove the sky belonged to women too, becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. The world was suddenly connected by invisible highways in the sky. Act 4. The Jet and the Boom. But humans are never satisfied. We wanted to go faster, and the propeller had a physical limit. As a propeller spins faster and faster, the tips approach the speed of sound, creating shock waves that tear the wood or metal apart. You could only go so fast before the physics broke down. Once again, war forced our hand. During the dark days of World War II, a young British engineer named Frank Whittle and a German physicist named Hans von Ohain independently solved the problem. They threw away the propeller entirely. They invented a machine that sucked air into the front, compressed it violently, mixed it with fuel, ignited it, and blasted the exhaust out the back. Action and reaction. The jet engine. The early jet fighters, like the German Messerschmitt Me 262, appeared at the very end of the war. They were terrifyingly fast, leaving Allied prop planes in the dust. They sounded like tearing canvas. They heralded a new era. But with the jet engine came a new, seemingly insurmountable wall: the sound barrier. As a plane approached 760 miles per hour, the air could no longer get out of the way fast enough. It compressed into a literal wall of shock waves. Planes that tried to dive through the sound barrier violently shook themselves to pieces in midair. People believed it was a physical limit of aerodynamics, a brick wall in the sky. But in 1947, out in the blistering heat of the Mojave Desert, the U.S. military built a plane shaped like a .50 caliber bullet, the Bell X-1. It didn't have a jet engine. It had 4 liquid-fuel rocket chambers. The pilot was a 24-year-old combat veteran with a West Virginia drawl named Chuck Yeager. 2 days before the flight, Yeager broke 2 ribs falling off a horse. He was in so much pain, he couldn't close the hatch of the aircraft, so he used a sawn-off broom handle to lever the door shut. They dropped the X-1 out of the belly of a bomber. Yeager ignited the rockets. The plane accelerated wildly. The shaking began, violent and terrifying, as he hit the compressed wall of air. And then, the needle on his Mach meter jumped off the scale. The shaking stopped. The cockpit went entirely smooth and entirely silent. He was outrunning his own sound. Down on the desert floor, observers heard a sound like a thunderclap. The sonic boom. The barrier was broken. Act 5. The Golden Age of the Jumbo. With the sound barrier shattered and the jet engine perfected, the military went on to build aircraft straight out of science fiction. The SR-71 Blackbird, flying at the edge of space, so fast that if a missile was fired at it, the standard evasive maneuver was simply to accelerate and outrun the missile. But the true revolution of the jet age didn't happen in the military. It happened for the public. In the late 1950s, Boeing introduced the 707. Suddenly, you could fly from New York to London in 6 hours instead of 15. It was the era of the jet set. Glamour, martinis, and wide aisles. And then, in 1969, Boeing gambled the entire existence of their company on a plane so impossibly large, people thought it would never leave the ground. The 747, the jumbo jet. It had a spiral staircase. It had a cocktail lounge in the upper deck. The tail was 6 stories high. The 747 didn't just change aviation, it changed global economics. By packing 400 people into a single fuselage, the cost of a ticket plummeted. For the first time in human history, the working class could afford to cross an ocean. You didn't have to be a millionaire, an explorer, or a soldier to see the world. You just had to buy a ticket. The 747 democratized the planet. Act 6. The Concorde and the Modern Paradox. For a brief, shining moment, we thought the future was supersonic. In 1976, the British and the French unveiled a masterpiece of engineering, the Concorde. It was a dart of pure white titanium. It flew at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. You could leave London at 10 a.m., fly faster than the rotation of the Earth, and arrive in New York at 9 a.m. before you had even left. You could watch the sun rise in the west. It was the pinnacle of the romantic era of flight. But it was doomed. It was deafeningly loud. It guzzled fuel at an astonishing rate, and it was incredibly expensive. When a Concorde tragically crashed in Paris in the year 2000, and the aviation industry suffered the financial shocks of 9/11 shortly after, the dream of supersonic commercial travel died. The Concordes were grounded, towed into museums to sit as beautiful, melancholic monuments to a future that never arrived. Which brings us to today. Today, the romance is largely gone. Airlines are run by accountants, not test pilots. The planes are astonishingly safe, the safest form of transport ever devised by man. But they are built for absolute efficiency. Massive twin-engine jets like the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A350 fly silently through the night, built of carbon fiber, calculated to burn the exact minimum amount of fuel required. We take off our shoes at security. We complain about the baggage fees. We pull down the window shade so we can watch a movie on an iPad, completely ignoring the curvature of the Earth visible just inches from our face. We have domesticated the miracle. Epilogue. The miracle intact. But the miracle remains. Think about the bicycle mechanics in the freezing sand of Kitty Hawk. Think about the kids in canvas biplanes over the trenches. Think about Lindbergh fighting sleep in the dark, and Yeager fighting the physical laws of the universe with broken ribs. All of that history, all of that blood, and genius, and terrifying courage. It was all leading to you, sitting in seat 14B, annoyed that the Wi-Fi is a bit slow. It took humanity millions of years to stand upright, but it took us only 66 years to go from a 12-second hop on a wooden glider to leaving footprints on the dust of the moon. So the next time you fly, before you pull down the plastic window shade, take a moment. Look out at the clouds beneath your